On November 21st, 2016, a quiet neighborhood in Knoxville, Tennessee, woke up to a nightmare that no family should ever have to face. Inside her family home, 16-year-old Emma Walker was found critically injured in her bedroom. Despite desperate efforts to save her life, Emma was pronounced dead, leaving her family, friends, and an entire community devastated. Emma wasn't just another teenager. She was a beloved daughter, a dedicated student, and a talented cheerleader at Central High School. Friends describe her as kind, energetic, and someone who could brighten a room with her smile. She had dreams, ambitions, and a future that seemed full of promise. But as investigators began looking into her death, they quickly realized this was no accident. Behind the image of a normal high school life was a complicated relationship that had become increasingly toxic. Emma had been involved with fellow student Riley Gaul. Their relationship had lasted for years and was known among friends to be intense and turbulent. What began as a typical teenage romance gradually transformed into something much darker. The couple frequently broke up and reconciled. Arguments became common. Jealousy and possessiveness started to overshadow affection. Friends noticed the emotional strain the relationship was placing on Emma. Eventually, Emma decided to move on. She wanted distance from the constant drama and conflict, but ending the relationship proved far more difficult than she expected. As Emma focused on reclaiming her life, Riley struggled to accept that their relationship was over. What happened next would lead investigators down a path filled with obsession, manipulation, and ultimately murder. This is the heartbreaking story of Emma Walker. In the months leading up to Emma's death, her relationship with Riley Gaul had become increasingly unstable. The two had dated throughout much of their teenage years, and by all appearances, their lives had become deeply intertwined. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. Friends later revealed that Riley had become extremely possessive. He reportedly monitored Emma's activities, worried constantly about who she was spending time with, and struggled whenever she attempted to create distance between them. Their arguments became more frequent, and the relationship was marked by repeated breakups followed by reconciliations. For Emma, the emotional roller coaster became exhausting. She wanted independence. She wanted to enjoy high school, spend time with friends, and focus on her future. The constant tension with Riley was becoming a burden she could no longer carry. As the relationship deteriorated, communication between the two became increasingly hostile. Text messages exchanged between them painted a picture of a young woman trying to move forward and a young man unable to let go. Those close to Emma noticed she seemed frustrated and overwhelmed. She had begun setting boundaries and making it clear that she no longer wanted the relationship to continue in the same way. Unfortunately, Riley appeared unwilling to accept those boundaries. Investigators would later uncover evidence showing that his fixation on Emma had grown stronger as the breakup progressed. Rather than moving on, he became consumed by the idea of losing her. What nobody knew at the time was that these feelings were escalating into something dangerous. As tensions continued to rise, a series of events began unfolding that would ultimately place Riley Gaul at the center of a murder investigation and reveal just how far obsession can go when it is left unchecked. When detectives arrived at the Walker home, they immediately began searching for answers. The circumstances surrounding Emma's death raised serious concerns. Investigators discovered that Emma had been shot while sleeping in her bedroom. The attack appeared deliberate and targeted. There were no signs of forced entry into the house, and nothing suggests a robbery or random act of violence. Someone had come to property with a purpose. As detectives examined the scene, they recovered critical evidence from outside the home. The trajectory of the bullet indicated it had been fired through Emma's bedroom wall from outside the residence. The investigation quickly shifted toward identifying who might have wanted to harm her. Almost immediately, Riley Gaul's name surfaced. Detectives learned about the troubled nature of his relationship with Emma and began reviewing communications between the two teenagers. Text messages revealed ongoing conflict and emotional turmoil. Some messages suggested Riley was struggling intensely with the breakup. Investigators also discovered suspicious activity in the days leading up to the murder. Witnesses reported unusual behavior, and evidence began pointing toward careful planning rather than an impulsive act. As detectives dug deeper, digital evidence became one of their most valuable tools. Cell phone records, online searches, and electronic communications started painting a troubling picture. The evidence suggested someone had researched topics connected to firearms and methods of carrying out an attack. Each new discovery pushed investigators closer to the truth. What initially seemed like an impossible mystery was beginning to take shape. The person responsible was not a stranger lurking in the shadows. Instead, detectives were beginning to suspect that the killer was someone Emma knew very well, someone who had once claimed to care deeply about her. And soon, the evidence would become impossible to ignore. As the trial moved forward, prosecutors carefully laid out their case against Riley Gaul. Piece by piece, they presented evidence that painted a chilling picture of obsession, jealousy, and premeditation. The jury heard testimony about the turbulent relationship between Riley and Emma. Friends, classmates, and investigators describe a relationship that had become increasingly unhealthy as Emma attempted to move on with her life. Messages exchanged between the two revealed emotional conflict and Riley's inability to accept the end of their relationship. One of the most powerful aspects of the prosecution's case was the digital evidence. Investigators uncovered internet searches and communications that suggested planning and intent. Combined with witness testimony and physical evidence collected during the investigation, prosecutors argued that the murder was not an accident or a momentary loss of control. It was a deliberate act. The defense challenged the evidence and questioned aspects of the investigation. However, prosecutors maintained that the facts pointed overwhelmingly toward Riley's guilt. Throughout the proceedings, Emma's family sat through painful testimony about the final days of their daughter's life. For them, the trial was not just about evidence. It was about seeking justice for a young woman whose future had been stolen. As closing arguments concluded, the jury faced a difficult responsibility of determining Riley's fate. The decision would have lasting consequences not only for him, but also for everyone affected by the tragedy. After reviewing the evidence and testimony, jurors reached a verdict. The courtroom fell silent as the decision was announced. The outcome would be a measure of accountability, but could never erase the devastating loss suffered by Emma's family and friends. The jury ultimately found Riley Gaul guilty of Emma Walker's murder. The verdict marked the end of a lengthy legal battle and provided a measure of justice for Emma's loved ones. During sentencing, the court considered the evidence, the devastating impact of the crime, and the circumstances surrounding the case. Family members spoke about the enormous void left behind by Emma's death. They described a daughter, sister, and friend whose life had been filled with promise and potential. For the Walker family, no sentence could truly heal their loss. Emma was only 16 years old. She would never graduate, attend college, pursue her dreams, or experience the milestones that lay ahead. Those opportunities were taken from her forever. The case shocked communities across the country because it highlighted a difficult reality. Toxic and controlling behaviors in relationships can escalate in dangerous ways when warning signs are ignored. What began as a teenage romance ultimately ended in unimaginable tragedy. Today, Emma's story continues to be remembered not only because of crime itself, but because of the lessons it carries. Her case has sparked conversations about healthy relationships, emotional abuse, jealousy, and the importance of recognizing harmful behavior before it escalates. Friends and family continue to honor Emma's memory, remembering the vibrant, caring young woman she was rather than the tragedy that ended her life. Her story remains one of the most heartbreaking true crime cases involving teenage violence in recent memory. A promising future was stolen, a family was forever changed, and an entire community was left asking how a relationship that once seemed ordinary could end in such devastating loss. Emma Walker's name will not be forgotten.